Hello and welcome. My name is Biagio Mazza, Pastoral Associate at St. Sabina Parish in Belton, Missouri, and I'm here to welcome you to another Do You Know series question. Today's Do You Know question is, do you know the backdrop to the Feast of the Conversion of St. Paul? Every January the 25th, we celebrate the Feast of the Conversion of St. Paul. The day commemorates the transfer of his bones from the catacombs to the Constantinian Basilica, the basilica built by Constantine, named to this very day, named St. Paul outside the walls, where the bones of St. Paul were transferred from the catacombs to the basilica and placed under the main altar. St. Paul was a Jew. Who was born in the city of Tarsus in Asia Minor, modern-day Turkey, in roughly about the year 10 A.D., to Jewish parents who were very much influenced by the Greek culture of its day. So much so that they named his son Saul, a Jewish name, and he was trained in both Jewish and Greek circles and education. Paul identifies himself in his own letter to the Philippians in Philippians chapter 3, verse 5. He identifies himself as being trained in the Pharisaic tradition. So he himself was a Pharisee, the best of the Jewish tradition at the time, and trained in that. And so he was a proud Jew who, as he grew older, saw himself totally dedicated to Judaism and saw himself also as a leader in persecuting the followers of this new upstart, Jesus of Nazareth, who began to call themselves as his followers and disciples. So he, both in the Acts of the Apostles and in his own letters, he calls himself a persecutor of the Christians. And in the year of roughly 35 A.D., when he was about 25 years old, on his way to Damascus to persecute and arrest the followers of Jesus, he was struck down by a blinding light, and he heard a voice say, "Saul, Saul, why do you persecute me?" And Saul responded by saying, "Who are you?" And the voice said, "I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting." And he remained blind and was instructed to go to the house of one of the followers of Jesus where he would be cured. He did and was cured, and for the next 3 years he reflected on his experience on the road to Damascus, which ultimately led him to come to a deeper understanding, to accept Jesus as the long-awaited Jewish Messiah. But he understood himself as being commissioned by Jesus in his famous encounter at Damascus to preach the whole message of Jesus to Gentiles. Because Paul now understood as a Jew that with the coming of the Jewish Messiah, Judaism had to open itself up to the world and welcome and invite Gentiles into the message that Jesus brought. And so he saw his whole mission as being the disciple to the Gentiles. His focus on Jesus, what Jesus did, was primarily focused on Jesus' passion, death, and resurrection. In other words, Jesus' passion, death, and resurrection, according to Paul, and it's true in the theology of all of his letters, that Jesus' passion, death, and resurrection was the central event that reconciled not only Jews, but all of humanity, reconciled them back to God. And we were, again, justified and in right relationship with God. And so for Paul, that was the central message of his entire theology and the central focus of his mission to make Christ known to the entire world and so on. He insisted that for Gentiles, Jewish law was no longer necessary. Only faith and belief in Christ was important. For faithful Jews, the law was still important and needed to be followed. He himself was a faithful Jew and continued to follow the fidelity to Jewish law all of his life. He never left Judaism. So in many ways, the term conversion is a misnomer because really it wasn't a conversion from anything. Paul remained a Jew all of his life. Rather, it was a deeper understanding into the role of Jesus, the long-awaited Jewish Messiah, who has now came to proclaim God's love and God's covenant to all of God's people, not just the Jews. And therefore, we, as disciples, have to also have that mission of proclaiming Jesus to all. And so, Paul's thrust through his entire life was to proclaim Jesus as the long-awaited Messiah that all were welcome now into reconciliation and justification with God. Two significant events mark this day. In 1908, the Week of Prayer for Christian Unity was established, which began on January the 18th and always ended on January 25th, the Feast of the Conversion of St. Paul, with its primary mission being Christian unity throughout the world. In 1959, the newly elected Pope John XXIII used this day in the Basilica of St. Paul outside the walls after presiding at a Mass. He used this day to announce to a group of cardinals gathered there that he had an intention of calling an ecumenical council which would be devoted to Christian unity. And this resulted ultimately in the Second Vatican Council, which began on October the 11th, 1962. So both events actually connect with the significance of this day for St. Paul, who began this whole mission to the Gentiles, and who continues to this very day to be significant in the mission to all of God's people. So I hope this has helped to understand just a bit about the backdrop and the significance of the Feast of the Conversion of St. Paul, and I hope you will return again to More Do You Know series questions to learn more about our faith. Thank you very much.